I did a basic example of load more with as little code as possible, and it seems to make sense. I have a load more button over here, which is this button over here. If you click on it, it just runs the load more function, increments the page counter, creates a list item, adds it to this OL list over here, and then history.replace, which basically just updates the URL to have this page counter over here. When you actually use the replace state, it updates the URL without actually adding to the history stack. And I'll explain more how that history object works in a bit. It used to be very confusing 10 years ago because the documentation was poor, but looks like lately it's been, documentation for it is much more understandable. So I'll explain more how the history works in a moment. All right, so I click load more, fires this function over here and just adds more items. But also notice that this replace history is causing my URL to update to page 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. So I'm not actually adding to the history stack. I'm only updating the current page for the history. Okay. So if I click on, let's say this, go to page 6, I'm just doing a dump of the request variable on this page like this, right? Nothing special. You'll see that, yes, I've gone to page 6. I'm dumping page 6. If I click back, the URL up here remains number 10, which is where we last were. And I just have a PHP function where I look for the request variable. If it's been populated, I go ahead and print the last 10. Okay, do some more. Now I'm on number 13. Right, click to page 2, click back, and this should still say 13. Okay, in terms of how the history object works, yeah, 10 years ago, it was just not documented well, but things are much easier now. I just go to the Mozilla's Web History API and have sample code here, which I think if you play around with it, it makes a lot of sense. I have a page loaded up here, and the history object, basically, when you run the push state function, you're actually adding another page to the stack or URL to the stack, adding another URL to stack, and replace basically replaces the last page that you loaded, or the current page that you're on, and replace the URL without adding to the stack. And when you click the history.back, so clicking this button or actually running the JavaScript back function, then you're basically popping an item off the history. And there's an event here that you can create, which is this. What it'll do is when you actually hit back, this event will fire. Okay, so let's actually load this in here. And if I run this history, let's push an item onto the stack. You will notice that the URL updates to page 1. Okay, let's add another one. And this one will add a second URL to page 2. Right? If you actually click back or you run the history.back function, then you're basically coming back to page 1. And when you go to page 1, this event will fire. It'll show you what your URL is, and it'll also show what this JSON object that you've loaded in here. So let's go ahead and try that. So the previous JSON object, page 1, this page 1 gets shown here. So we went from here to here, right? So, and if I click back again, you come back to the original page that we loaded, which had no state object, so it stays null, and this is the URL that we'll be on, which is this. Okay, click forward, we're adding an item back on to the stack, right? And now on page 2, click back. Right, and click back in, right? So let's go ahead and let's go all the way back to the beginning. And now replace state basically replaces this URL or replaces this last item. So let's go ahead and do this. Right, so now it's as if we never ever ran this method, this function call at all. We only went from page 1 to page 3. So if I click back, you'll see that I am on page 1. Click forward, I'm on page 3, right? So 2 no longer exists. So that's how the history API works.